Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring remote viewing.
Oh, yeah, psychic spying.
That's the one. And you know what's really cool? We have this stack of declassified CIA documents about it all. A whole program they had called Project Stargate.
Wow. So, the government was really looking into this?
For over 20 years. Can you believe it?
Huh. I mean, it's fascinating, but, well, a lot of scientists are pretty skeptical.
Yeah, and we're going to be keeping that skepticism in mind as we go through all of this. We're not trying to prove or disprove anything. Just take a good look at what they did, what they found, and what it all means.
Sounds good. So, where do we start?
Well, Project Stargate itself has a pretty interesting history.
Yeah. It started back in the 1970s, right?
Right, and it had these three parts to it, like different teams working on different things.
Okay. Like what?
So they had basic research, then operations, and then also foreign assessment.
Wow. So they were really trying to cover all the bases.
It seems that way. Like they wanted to know if remote viewing could be, proven scientifically.
Right. Right. And I guess operations would be like, can we actually use this stuff?
Exactly. And then were other countries doing it too?
It makes sense that they would want to know that. Keep up with the Joneses and all.
Yeah. And so all of this was going on mostly secret, I guess, until 1995 when a lot of the documents were declassified.
That must have been quite the event.
It was, and it led to this big review by the American Institutes for Research, the AA.
Okay, so the AR looked at all these declassified documents.
Yep, and their report is a big part of what we're looking at today.
Makes sense. Okay, so before we get to the AR review, though, can we talk about the early research at SRI, the Stanford Research Institute?
Oh, yeah. That's where some of the most interesting and maybe unbelievable stories come from.
It is fascinating stuff. But, well, anecdotes aren't really proof of anything, scientifically speaking, I mean.
For sure. But some of these anecdotes are pretty wild, like the one about Ingo Swann. He was an artist, and he supposedly remote viewed this thing called a magnetometer.
Oh, boy.
A magnetometer. It's this scientific instrument, and he drew it, like a diagram of how it was built, and it was really accurate. But he'd never actually seen one in person.
Okay, now that is wild.
Right. And Swann helped develop this protocol, Scanate, where they used geographic coordinates to test remote viewing. So, you don't get to see a picture of the place, just its location on a map.
Clever.
Another one is Pat Price. He was a former police commissioner, and people said he was amazing at remote viewing.
Really? What did he do?
Well, one story is that he gave all these details about this secret Soviet facility in Semipalatinsk.
Oh, wow.
And some of what he said actually seemed to match up with what the intelligence agencies already knew from other sources.
Interesting. So they started taking it a bit more seriously then.
It seems that way, but, just stories aren't really enough.
Right. You need, hard data, numbers you can analyze.
Exactly. And that's what researchers started trying to do.
So, was it just chance? Or was there something real going on? You need, what do you call it? Statistical significance.
Exactly. So if the results are statistically significant, it means it probably wasn't just a fluke.
Yeah, basically. And you want to know how big the effect is, too?
Right. Oh, right. The effect size?
Yep. So, even if it's statistically significant, maybe the effect is so tiny it doesn't really matter much.
Makes sense.
And you want to see if other researchers can get the same results.
Oh, right. Replication is important.
Yeah. So that's where the early SRI experiments, they got some criticism,
Because they weren't rigorous enough.
Yeah. They needed tighter controls. So later on, both SRI and SAIC, Science Applications International Corporation, tried to fix those problems.
Makes sense. So now let's talk about the AR review. This is where it gets really interesting because they had experts with, different opinions.
Oh, like who?
Well, there was Dr. Jessica Utz, a statistician, and Dr. Ray Hyman. He was, how do I put this? A skeptic.
Okay, so they probably had some interesting debates.
They did. So the ARR review, they said that lab studies did show evidence for remote viewing.
Really?
And it was statistically significant.
Wow. But wait, so that means it's real then?
Well, not so fast. They also said that it wasn't clear whether those effects were, paranormal or something else.
I see. So there's an effect, but we don't know what's causing it.
Exactly. And here's the big thing. They said there was no proof that remote viewing was actually useful for, spying and stuff.
So all that research, and they couldn't really use it.
That's what they concluded.
Interesting. Okay, so what did those two experts, Utz and Hyman, what did they think about all this?
Well, Dr. Utz argued that the statistics were strong enough that they should keep researching it.
Okay.
But Dr. Hyman, He was more cautious.
So what did he say?
He basically said, look, we don't even really understand how remote viewing would work. Like, what's the theory behind it?
That's a good point. And he probably wanted to see more research too, right?
He did.
Yeah.
He wanted to be sure that these results could be replicated by other scientists.
Makes sense. You got to be sure, right?
Exactly. So we've got this scientific puzzle, right? There's something going on, but we don't know exactly what it is.
A puzzle with high stakes.
Yeah.
I mean, this is about, like, espionage and psychic powers and, well, it's just fascinating.
It is. It really makes you think. So they found something in the lab, but the AR report says it wasn't really useful for, actual intelligence work.
Yeah, it does make you wonder, why wouldn't it work in the field if they were getting results in the lab?
That's what I was thinking.
We see there's a big difference between those two situations, right?
Yeah.
The lab, it's all controlled.
Right.
But in, like, real-world spying, it's unpredictable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And actually, the ARR review, they interviewed people who had used, or I guess tried to use remote viewing for intelligence gathering.
Oh, really? So like actual spies?
Well, probably more like analysts and stuff. But yeah, they asked them about their experiences.
That's so cool. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall for those conversations. What did they say?
Well, one big problem they talked about was choosing targets. In the lab, it's easy.
You pick something like visually distinct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in the real world, you might be looking for, I don't know, a specific person.
Or like a hidden bunker or something.
Right. Much harder to see that kind of thing remotely.
Way more vague.
Another issue was feedback.
Oh, like knowing if they were right or not.
Yeah. In the lab, they could tell the viewer right away.
Which probably helps them get better.
Exactly. But in a real operation,
Yeah.
you can't exactly check with the enemy to see if the viewer's description matches up.
True.
And then the info they got from the viewers, it was often really, I don't know.
Hard to interpret.
Yeah. Lots of symbols, vague impressions.
Oh, right. Like I noticed that in the documents. It's not always clear what they're trying to say.
Exactly. So it's hard to, like, separate the real stuff from just random thoughts.
And that could lead to some bad decisions.
Definitely. So even if remote viewing is real, there are a lot of practical problems.
So the lab results, they're interesting, but not very helpful in the real world, at least not yet.
That seems to be the case.
Okay, well, this has been fascinating, but I'm ready to move on a bit.
Okay. What else did you want to talk about?
Well, in those documents, there's other stuff besides the AIR review, other things they were researching.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, there's this thing called Ganzfeld stimulation.
What's that?
It's kind of weird, actually. Imagine, like, you're in a dimly lit room,
Okay.
and you've got headphones on, playing white noise.
So no sights or sounds, basically.
Right. And then they cover your eyes with these, like, halved ping pong balls.
Sounds kind of relaxing, actually.
Maybe. But the researchers, they weren't trying to give people a spa day. They were exploring these things they called psi phenomena.
Like psychic stuff.
Yeah. Things like telepathy and, you guessed it, remote viewing.
So the idea is that by blocking out all the normal senses, it's easier to, like, pick up on psychic signals.
That's the gist of it. And, some of the results using Ganzfeld, they were statistically significant.
Interesting.
It's like maybe our normal consciousness blocks us from seeing these things. But when you quiet the mind...
Maybe something else can come through.
Exactly. And they also looked at brain activity during remote viewing.
Makes sense. If it's really happening, it should show up somehow, right?
Right. They use things like EEG, which measures electrical activity in the brain.
And did they find anything?
Well, it's complicated. Some studies showed correlations with certain brainwave patterns, but others didn't.
So, still a mystery then.
Pretty much. Oh, and speaking of mysteries, there's this other thing, lucid dreaming.
Oh, wow. Lucid dreaming and remote viewing.
Yeah, they actually did experiments with it.
Wait, how does that even work?
Well, lucid dreaming is when you know you're dreaming and you can kind of control the dream.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. But how does that connect to remote viewing?
Well, they thought that because you're aware in the dream, maybe you could, like, focus that awareness to see distant places.
Huh. And did it work?
The results were mixed, just like with a lot of the Project Stargate stuff.
It does seem like they were really pushing the limits of what we know about, like, the mind and how it works.
They were exploring the uncharted territory of consciousness. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, this is way more than just, like, can someone see things with their mind? It's about what reality even is.
And what humans are capable of.
Exactly. And even though Project Stargate officially ended back in 1995, People are still fascinated by remote viewing.
It's a mystery that hasn't been solved.
And it makes you wonder, what if we could solve it? What if we could really understand and use this ability? What would that mean for us? It really makes you think, like, what if all this stuff is real? What could we do with it?
Right. Imagine the possibilities. If we could really understand remote viewing and make it reliable, I mean, the potential applications are, well, pretty mind-blowing.
No kidding.
Hmm.
And there are so many areas where it could be useful. Like, okay, let's start with the most obvious one, intelligence work.
Espionage, like psychic spies.
Yeah, it could give you a huge advantage, right? To know what your enemies are up to without having to, send in agents or rely on satellites.
It would be a game changer. Though, of course, we talked about all those challenges, right?
Yeah.
Making it work in the real world. And there are ethical considerations, too. Like, is it okay to spy on people with psychic powers?
Big ethical questions for sure. But let's say, just for fun,
Yeah.
that we could figure all that out, solve the practical problems, and come up with some ethical guidelines. Where else could we use remote viewing?
Well, medicine comes to mind. Imagine being able to diagnose illnesses remotely or even locate missing people.
That's a great one.
Hmm.
Or what about archaeology? Think of all the lost cities and buried artifacts we could find.
Wow. It'd be like having X-ray vision for history.
And for science, too. We could explore other planets, the bottom of the ocean, even the human brain itself, all without having to physically go there.
This is getting really exciting. So it's not just about spying, it's about pushing the limits of what we can know and do.
Exactly. It's about expanding our understanding of the world and of ourselves. But we have to remember, all of this is still speculation, right?
You're right. We're a long way from having remote viewing archaeologists or psychic doctors.
Yeah. But the research, it raises some really interesting questions.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, what if?
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
I guess just a sense of wonder about the human mind and how much we still don't know. Remote viewing might turn out to be real, it might not. But either way, it makes us think about the possibilities. And that's always a good thing, right?
Absolutely. It's a reminder that there's always more to learn, more to explore, and who knows, maybe someday those old CIA files will be seen as the beginning of something truly revolutionary.
Here's hoping.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of remote viewing. Until next time, keep those minds open and keep exploring the unknown.